Hello Baphomates, welcome to another one of my videos. I'm Jobe Fortuna and this is the Book of Job YouTube channel. So I was going through some of my older videos earlier today and I came across some of the stuff I've covered involving rituals and how I've got my altar laid out and stuff like that. But then I also realised I haven't actually covered the sort of tools I use and the sort of stuff that you can use them for. Now, I do a lot of stuff on TikTok, so I've covered that. If you don't follow me on TikTok, link in the description. But I haven't actually done any YouTube videos sort of covering this sort of thing. I do find TikTok quite easy to use because I can literally just like upload a video in like 5 minutes, whilst this takes a bit of preparation time, editing, etc. But yeah, so I thought I'd cover some of the tools I like to use and some of the stuff that you yourselves can also use. And personally, I feel that some of this stuff can be used whether you're a theistic Satanist or an atheistic Satanist. I'm an atheistic Satanist myself, but I feel that these sort of tools can be used for both. If you are a theistic Satanist and find some of this interesting, do leave a comment below. Or if you're just watching this video in general, leave a comment below, like and subscribe. All of that YouTube standard. Yeah, so I thought today I'd cover some of the stuff that I actually have, sort of the stuff I like to use, and if you're new to Satanism and kind of want to get some bits for an altar, cover the sort of stuff that I like to use. But at the same time, even like if you don't have much of a budget and kind of have like want to use a smaller amount of things, not necessarily splurging out and buying a whole bunch of stuff, we can kind of cover that as well. So join me, won't you? So this is kind of how my altar looks now, as opposed to how it looked about 2 years ago. Still have the same black cloth, still have a lot of the jewellery, but you will also find yourself that if you wind up having an altar for a while, a lot of stuff will change. Some people like to change it seasonally, some people just like to have flowers, etc. But this is kind of how my layout is at the moment. As I said, the more basic stuff is in an older video. I'll try and leave a link in the description for that. But as I said, if you're starting out, you might not necessarily need or want all of this stuff. Some of this stuff is kind of left over from back when I was a tarot collector, so I've got a lot of tarot cards I can use as a display. Used to collect a lot of crystals, so I still have a lot of crystals kind of left over from that. So I've kind of established them as part of my rituals. But I'm going to run through some of the stuff that's actually kind of on here that I consider the standard. I kind of like the basic stuff, and obviously you can kind of pick and choose what sort of things you like to use, or comment down below to talk about the sort of stuff that you like to use. So first off, I'd like to start with what I would consider like a very basic thing to have for an altar, and that would be your candles. Now you can have various colour candles that kind of cover various sort of situations. I have several. Now, as I said, so I kind of have a particular designation for particular colours of candles. So, for example, as I try to, some of my stuff involves the 7 deadly sins. Each colour represents a particular sin. I use black candles as kind of like a standard background candle. So whilst you like the others, this is just the extra candle you have to kind of not necessarily make up the numbers, but just to kind of add ambience and kind of add, for lack of a better term, power to what you're doing. Now, I do have white candles. I tend to burn a white candle first and kind of set up the rest of my ritual after that. So I might burn a white candle first, and then at that point, that's when I start burning my incense and start lighting up the other candles and setting up the rest of the altar before I start the actual ritual. So this is kind of like a starter. I consider it kind of like clearing the air, as it were. Now, as I said before, if you are a theistic Satanist that, or just a pagan or a practitioner of witchcraft, I do try and not appropriate stuff but at the same time, some of my friends of whom are practicing pagans, witches, etc., are kind of cool with it, as long as I'm kind of using it with respect and kind of doing it and using the right colours for what they're kind of designed for. Now, in that regard, one of my friends had tipped me that one of the things you do when you finish burning your candles is to use a candle snuffer, because if you are using a candle to contact a particular deity, blowing out the candle is the equivalent of blowing in their face, which I thought was kind of amusing. But as I say, it's kind of like a sign of respect, and personally it feels like an added part of a ritual where you're kind of respecting the ritual by having a couple of tools. Now, I wouldn't consider a candle snuffer necessarily being particularly important or vital. Once again, if we're talking about someone, if you're the sort of person who's kind of on a shoestring budget, I wouldn't necessarily consider that a necessity. You can always just use like a jar, a glass, something like that, something to snuff out a candle. It doesn't necessarily be a snuffer. This I got from like my grandparents years ago anyway, so this just happens to be in my house. But yeah, something like a candle snuffer kind of adds to the ritual, and kind of gives it a bit more, not respect, but kind of gives it a bit bigger feeling and the idea that you're doing something of importance. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to cover is incense. So when it comes to incense, I feel that it's another thing that kind of helps with the focus and the ambience. So once again, these are quite cheap. So in the UK, these are £1.50. So I think that equates to like $3-4 US. Now these are the kind of typical ones you'll find in almost everywhere. You need a holder for these. About ostensibly, you basically just have like a standard wick, a standard stick here, in the end, and these tend to last for about half an hour. Now, I always like to vary which one I use depending on the feel of the ritual. If I want to do something passive and calm, I tend to go with this dragon's blood, which smells quite sweet. But if I want something a bit more not aggressive, but something a bit more strong and stern, something a bit more focused, I tend to use stuff that has a bit more of a spice to it. So another type of incense you can get is this little cylindrical incense. So this is one of the ones I prefer. I'm not going to try and read these names because I'm dyslexic and I fear that I may mispronounce them anyway. But this is one of my favourite fragrances when it comes to the cylindrical ones. So with these, you burn the top, and these burn quicker than the sticks, but produce more smoke. And in this box, it comes with a little bit of a container, so you can kind of place this on top, so it doesn't burn anything and it's resting on, and these things do get quite hot, as you can imagine. So these are quite good, but as I said, these can fill a room quite quickly with smoke, so do be aware of that if you do want to use these. And the worst offender of these is the third type of incense you can get, which is incense resin. So I don't actually have the container for this, I did throw it, but these are basically incense resin, and these you kind of burn on charcoal, which I'll show you in a second, but you only need like a little pinch, so you're probably talking about, for these, about 5 pieces at most. And once again, these fill up a room very quickly and with a lot of smoke. So this is the Three Kings incense, so this is gold, frankincense and myrrh kind of all rolled into one. It has a very strong smell, so keeping it in a tight container is probably preferable. So these ones you tend to burn on charcoal discs. So once again, you get a packet of these. Once again, £1.50, so about $3-4. So with your charcoal disc, you've got this little gap here. So you'd place some of the incense on the charcoal disc. Then you would get your lighter, and you would light the side of the disc. Getting charcoal on my hand now. You'll light the side of the disc, and it will heat up, and it will basically, like standard charcoal, will burn without too much smoke after most of it's gone, and then it will kind of cook the incense. Now this is also handy if you want. These are also handy if you want to burn other things, such as rosemary, sage, or anything like that. So, but once again, this does fill a place full of smoke. Now I've recently purchased a small cauldron. It looks pretty cool. I do quite like the cauldron, but I contain it in there because this has to sit on something. As similar with the previous incense, this will heat quite quickly and very hot, so this must be on something heat proof. So do bear that in mind. Okay, so next I'd like to talk about wands. Now some practitioners do like to use wands. As I said, once again, theistic and atheistic. In the Satanic Bible and the Satanic rituals, they do. Anton LaVey does cover wands, so I thought I'd bring it up as well. So I don't tend to use them myself, but the concept of a wand is basically to move energy that is around you. Once again, if you are a believer in that kind of energy manipulation or not, that's basically what they're used for. So you can have them in various types. So this one is a crystal wand. I forget the name of the crystal itself, but this one's quite brittle, but as it's to a point. And so the idea is you kind of using this to kind of control the energy around your altar. So this is a nice little piece of crystal, and it does look quite nice as part of the display. You can purchase store-made wands where someone has obviously carved wood and manipulated it to make it look really cool. So you can also literally just get a standard stick. As I said, I don't really use wands in my altar, in my rituals, but I thought I'd get a nice bit of actual bit of wood. And so a lot of people do like to have a bit of naturalness in there. So as I mentioned earlier, some people like to have flowers as part of their altar, depending on the season, and so I thought a bit of wood would be a little helpful. So also so in an earlier video I had shown this really cool knife that I have as part of my altar. Now once again, this itself can also be used as a wand, although this is a case of be a bit more careful, but at the same time, so this still kind of gives you for me at least, this, as it's such a very cool design, it still kind of gives me the feeling of power and control. That what I'm saying is a bit more serious, I guess. That's how I said it. But as I said, I'm not a theist, nor do I believe really in magic, rather than the magic we perform ourselves. And another thing that you can use as a wand is maybe a bit of what's referred to as raw crystal. So this is smoky quartz, as it's a nice piece of crystal, and it's a nice lump. So I also do like to kind of consider this a wand, and it's once again a crystal, but at the same time it's quite small and compact. So this is even something you can slip in your pocket, in your jacket, not necessarily your jeans, but this is something you can put in your bag, a little travel kit if you wanted to. But yeah, I like the feeling of this in my hand. It does feel that it feels that it does something. As I mentioned in my one of my earlier videos, it's kind of like it feels like it's doing something, so you're kind of tricking your own brain into telling you that you're doing something, but kind of like a placebo. And at the same time, it's sort of kind of form of self-empowerment. You're allowing it to have power, I guess, is how I describe it. But I do like this piece of crystal, and as I said, it does feel quite nice in the hand, and it does feel like it would be useful to use as a kind of smaller wand. Once again, in case you're not necessarily rolling in that dough. So I know what you're thinking. Jobe, I now have my crystals, I now have my wands, I've got my incense and candles, but what do I do about my image of Satan I'm supposed to have? What do I do then? So, my good friend, I introduce you to the magical world of tarot. So, this is in the centerpiece of my altar. This is from the Goethe Tarot by the Scarabeo, also known as the Tower of Darkness. Now, I backed it on Kickstarter, so I kind of got like a special version, but I also purchased the standard version from online. This is like the standard version. So the reason I bring this up is some people have images of Satan statues, some people have images and statues of Baphomet. What I like to use, I do like to use cards. So I said this is just like a print, but the card itself is pretty nifty. So it's a bit glossy, but this is the sort of size we're talking about. In fact, let me just grab the old tape measure. So this card is 5 inches by 3 inches. Kind of like a standard tarot card size, or at least by the company of the Scarabeo. But yeah, so if you may have an issue about having a statue, it might be a bit too conspicuous. You might be able to get away with everything else, but a statue of the devil, you may not necessarily be able to get away with. Or, as we said before, you might just not have the money to buy a statue. Well, if like me, you're also a tarot collector, having an image of the devil tarot card as part of your altar can be a nice little addition. Once again, symbols of Baphomet are also quite popular as well, but I'm quite partial to this myself, as it's a bit subtle. First of all, it's a little subtle, but at the same time, it's something that still looks quite nice, and it can kind of go with the mood of your altar. And now, as I said, you can use other tarot decks depending on, if you are a tarot user, you can pretty much just use whichever version of the devil that you like as part of the altar. So the concept is, as long as you've kind of got an image, you don't necessarily have to spend 20 to 30 quid on buying a Baphomet statue, when if you've got a deck of tarot in your back, in like the back part of your room, you can just use that. And so they're kind of like these are kind of what I would consider the basics of like your typical satanic altar. Now, bear in mind, this is just my humble personal opinion. If these are the sort of things you don't necessarily want, you might want to do something else, go for it. One of the things about this is there's no real written rules, but these are kind of like, as I said, these are what I consider the basics to have. To kind of have a satanic altar. Now, if you don't want to have a picture of Satan or anyone else on there, you don't have to. It's no less legitimate than if you did have one. It's all down to personal taste, but this is kind of like the baseline of what I would kind of recommend people have if they wanted to build their own altar from the ground up, pretty much from scratch. Now, I'd also recommend getting like an altar cloth, only just so you don't get candle wax all over the place. So these are kind of like the basic things I would consider. So, as I said, these are kind of the stuff I would consider kind of like the basic things if you're trying to put together an altar and just have like the barest minimum. As I said, not everything's mandatory, of course. If you don't want to have a wand, don't have a wand. If you don't want an image, don't have an image. But these are kind of like these would be like helpful tips that can be helpful. So I do hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'd be very interested to hear the sort of stuff that you like to use as your basics, or sort of ideas that we can kind of banter about a bit. That would be really cool. But yeah, I do hope you enjoyed. I do hope you found this interesting and informative. And as always, don't forget to live deliciously.